Before she died in 1953, an elderly woman whispered to her family about a world that didn't exist on any map. A town once alive, filled with laughter, gardens, and the daily routines of ordinary people, erased without a trace. Official records claimed nothing had ever stood there, but her memories refused to be silenced. Names, homes, and lives had been deliberately wiped from history, leaving only shadows behind. What she revealed was more than nostalgia, it was a warning. Some truths are buried, hidden by those who rewrite history, but the soil, the remnants, and her memory refused to vanish. Her home sat at the edge of a dense Pennsylvania forest, quiet and unassuming, the kind of place where life moves slowly and the past lingers in every creaking floorboard. Yet in her final days, the woman's words carried weight far beyond the walls of that modest house. She spoke of a world that had vanished, a town where families once lived, loved, and thrived, yet official history insisted it never existed. Maps showed only blank spaces, and archives held only silence. Her memories were vivid: narrow dirt roads, wooden homes, gardens bursting with vegetables, and children racing through the streets at dusk. She recalled faces, names, and stories that defied the silence around them. As she leaned on her family, whispering what she had witnessed, it became clear that history had been manipulated, erased, and rewritten. But some truths, she insisted, refused to die. The forest beyond the woman's home was thick, its trees ancient and gnarled, standing as silent witnesses to a past few remembered. Sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, casting the ground in shifting shadows, and yet she spoke of a settlement that had once thrived there with startling clarity. It was not a European town, as some might assume, but an American old world, she insisted, a community so vibrant, so alive, that it seemed impossible it could vanish entirely. She could recall the smell of fresh-baked bread from small kitchens, the sound of children's laughter echoing across dirt paths, and the rhythmic clatter of tools as families worked their gardens and workshops. She described narrow lanes winding between wooden houses, their picket fences slightly askew yet meticulously cared for, and trees planted deliberately for shade and privacy. Every detail was precise, as though she had walked those streets only yesterday. What was remarkable, she told her family, was how ordinary the town had seemed to outsiders. Travelers passing through the region would see only a cluster of wooden homes, a small schoolhouse, and perhaps a church steeple rising among the treetops. To the casual observer, there was nothing remarkable about it. Yet within its borders, life pulsed with routines, joy, and sorrow. She spoke of farmers tending to their livestock, children chasing stray animals along narrow alleys, and neighbors exchanging news over wooden fences. There were small celebrations, she remembered, a harvest festival with homemade pies, a winter gathering with candlelit windows. But there was also hardship, illnesses, and disagreements, all treated with the quiet resilience of a community bound together by shared labor and trust. Even the landscape itself bore witness to human habitation. She described gardens planted in neat rows, orchards heavy with fruit, and wells dug deep into the soil for water. Paths wound through groves of trees and fields, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Each household had its own patch of land, each family its own history, yet the stories intertwined in subtle ways, through marriages, friendships, and shared memories. Despite her age, she could name almost every tree, every stone wall, every small structure that had once existed there, and she did so with a reverence that made her listeners uneasy.
It was as if she were speaking not only of a place, but of lives that still lingered in invisible form, etched into the soil and the air. Her family, initially skeptical, began to notice that her descriptions often matched anomalies in the landscape. There were depressions in the ground where foundations might have been, remnants of stone walls hidden beneath overgrowth, and oddly straight paths through the forest that led to nowhere. Even the names she recalled, of streets, families, and buildings, resonated with echoes in local oral histories, fragments of memory preserved in old diaries, letters, and faint rumors. These whispers, dismissed by official records, confirmed what she insisted: the place had existed, and its erasure was deliberate. She emphasized the subtle details that no one could have invented: the way rain pooled in a certain hollow, the sound of wind shifting through the trees at dusk, the particular angle of sunlight on the front steps of a house during a late afternoon in summer. Each memory reinforced the reality of the vanished settlement. It was not merely nostalgia, it was a living record in her mind, a mental archive that resisted erasure. And yet, she acknowledged with a tremor in her voice, the forest had swallowed the town almost entirely. Trees had grown over foundations, soil had drifted into cellars, and the passage of decades had blurred the edges of once familiar paths. Only she remained, carrying a detailed mental map of a world that official history claimed never existed. Her words were both a lament and a warning. Some places, some communities can be erased from maps and ledgers, but memory, if preserved carefully, can outlast the intentions of those who seek to obliterate it. By the end of her account, her family understood that this place was more than geography. It was a living testament to human existence and erasure, a community that thrived and vanished in silence, leaving only fragments and whispers behind. The woman's voice trembled not from age alone, but from the weight of a truth that had endured for decades, invisible yet undeniable.
After hearing her detailed memories of the vanished settlement, her family felt a compulsion to search for proof. They turned to archives, hoping that some official document, some faded map would confirm what the woman had described. What they found instead was disquieting silence. Birth records, property deeds, census entries, where there should have been pages of information, were either missing or incomplete. In some cases, entire decades of documentation seemed to have vanished, leaving only blank spaces where the lives of families, children, and neighbors should have been preserved. The local courthouse, when approached, offered only bureaucratic explanations: files lost to fire, ledgers misplaced over time, or incomplete microfilm. Yet the gaps were too precise, too systematic to be accidental. Streets she had described in vivid detail appeared in old maps from the late 1800s, then disappeared entirely from later editions. Town names, property boundaries, and building placements were redrawn as if someone had painstakingly erased a living community. Even the smallest inconsistencies caught the family's attention. Wells, gardens, and stone fences that were referenced in one document vanished in the next, leaving no explanation. Historians and local researchers were consulted, and their reactions varied from skepticism to outright unease. Some speculated that the town had been absorbed into surrounding land or simply abandoned over time. But these theories did not align with the woman's stories, which painted a picture of an active, thriving community abruptly removed from existence. A series of diaries from neighboring settlements hinted at the town's presence, with fleeting mentions of children attending school, neighbors exchanging goods, and seasonal festivals. The diaries ended abruptly, mirroring the erasure in the official records, leaving tantalizing fragments but no full narrative. Maps proved especially revealing. An early 1902 survey showed a small cluster of buildings along what is now an overgrown forest path, each marked with names of families she had recounted. By 1915, the maps were blank, and by the 1930s, aerial surveys depicted nothing but wild trees reclaiming the land. The precision of the erasure was chilling. Not a single home or street remained visible in official cartography, as though decades of human activity had been scrubbed from the earth itself. Even more curious were the land deeds. Some parcels were recorded for families she remembered. Others existed only on paper with no assigned owner. In several cases, property lines had been shifted mysteriously, creating gaps that corresponded with the exact location of the vanished settlement. The woman's insistence that her memories were accurate was reinforced with each discovery. The records were not merely incomplete, they had been actively rewritten to conceal something, to deny the existence of a town and its inhabitants. Her family noticed patterns in the erasures. Important community structures, like the schoolhouse and church she described in detail, were consistently omitted. Only trivial structures, like barns or small storage sheds, lingered in the archives. Even oral histories from longtime residents suggested discomfort or avoidance when the topic arose. Local elders whispered about a town that was never meant to exist, hinting at agreements made long ago to remove the settlement from public memory. The narrative from official channels clashed violently with recollections preserved in letters, diaries, and stories passed down through families, fragments of a history that refused to die. The woman's recollections became a lens through which her family could see the records not as failures, but as deliberate instruments of silence. Every blank page, every missing ledger, and every altered map told the same story. Someone, for reasons unclear but likely motivated by power, prejudice, or fear, had sought to erase the town from history. The erasure was not only bureaucratic, but cultural, leaving only whispers and fragments for anyone determined enough to seek them. By the time her family finished examining the records, it was clear that history, as it was written, could not be trusted. The woman's memories were not just personal recollections, they were a map to a truth hidden behind layers of official denial, evidence that a thriving settlement had existed and had been deliberately consigned to oblivion. The woman's memories were not merely of a place, they were of the people who had lived there. She spoke of a family at the heart of the vanished settlement, ordinary yet extraordinary in their quiet resilience. A father who rose with the dawn to tend his orchard, a mother whose hands bore the marks of daily labor yet moved with grace, and children whose laughter filled every corner of the town, leaving echoes that refused to fade. She recounted their routines in meticulous detail, the father checking fences for the livestock, the mother kneading dough for bread, the children racing each other along dirt lanes worn smooth by generations of footsteps. To anyone outside the family, these recollections might have seemed like the embellishments of age, yet she remembered names, birthdays, and relationships with astonishing precision. She described the oldest daughter who cared for her younger siblings with a sense of responsibility beyond her years, the son, mischievous yet clever, who found ways to entertain neighbors and friends, and grandparents whose stories wove together the history of the settlement. Each individual had a personality, a role, and a presence that she insisted was as real as the ground beneath their feet. The family she described was tightly knit, surviving the daily hardships of rural life through cooperation and quiet strength. Winters were long and harsh, yet neighbors helped one another, sharing firewood and food. Summers brought celebrations, harvest festivals, community dinners, and the occasional dance in the town square. These events were etched in the woman's mind as vividly as any photograph, capturing both joy and sorrow, laughter and loss. Yet, after the community vanished, the people she remembered seemed to disappear not only physically, but from memory itself. What made her recollections haunting was the abruptness of their disappearance. According to official records, the family had never existed. No birth certificates, no census entries, no property deeds remained. The townspeople she described became ghosts in the ledger books, lives that had been carefully erased. But in her mind, they were alive, walking the paths of their homes, speaking in their soft, familiar voices, laughing, arguing, and living with all the complexity of ordinary life. Her stories emphasized the human dimension of erasure. It was not simply streets or buildings that vanished, it was the people, their names, their achievements, and their legacies. Children who should have grown up, married, and raised families had their existence denied. Parents who toiled to create a home were rendered invisible. Every detail she shared, who baked bread on which day, who repaired a fence, who taught children to read, was a protest against the erasure that official history demanded. She also recalled neighbors outside the family whose lives intertwined with theirs. Shopkeepers, teachers, and farmers who had supported one another. Even fleeting interactions, like helping a neighbor carry firewood or sharing gossip over a fence, were preserved in her memory. In describing these relationships, she revealed that the settlement had been a functioning community, not merely a collection of isolated homes. Every person played a role, and their absence left a void not only in records but in the landscape itself. Her family listened in silence as she recounted tragedies and triumphs alike. Accidents, illnesses, births, and marriages, all the ordinary events that define life, occurred within the community. Yet the official narrative ignored them. The woman's insistence on these details was both an act of remembrance and a warning. Lives matter, even when erased from the annals of history. By the end of her account, it was clear that the family she remembered was emblematic of a larger truth. The settlement had been alive, real, and complex, yet deliberately removed from view. The erasure of individual lives was not accidental, it was a systemic act, an intentional obliteration of memory. Through her stories, the family gained a profound understanding. Even if records and maps deny existence, the lives of people persist in memory, and the truth cannot entirely be buried. After the family vanished, the forest did what it always does. It consumed. Paths once worn by daily footsteps grew over with moss and weeds. Wooden fences collapsed under the weight of decades. Gardens where children had raced and families had planted vegetables became indistinguishable from the surrounding wild. Nature reclaimed what humans had carefully cultivated, and with it came a profound silence. A silence that was more than the absence of noise, it was the absence of memory, of acknowledgement, of history itself. The woman described it with a tremor in her voice, a combination of sorrow and awe. She spoke of returning to the forest years later and feeling an emptiness in the air, a stillness so complete it seemed to swallow sound. Birds, insects, and wind still existed, but the echoes of human life, laughter, conversation, footsteps were gone. The silence wasn't natural, it was imposed. There was a deliberate erasure of the rhythms that once defined daily life, a quiet that carried the weight of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Locals who had grown up in neighboring settlements spoke cautiously about the area. Few dared to enter the forest after dusk. Parents warned children that the woods contained paths to nowhere, places where time and memory had been swallowed. Even decades later, stories lingered of shadows moving along forgotten lanes, of faint laughter carried by the wind, of gardens that once existed, now appearing only as subtle depressions in the soil. The silence was not emptiness, it was layered, filled with what had been removed and intentionally hidden from the world. Officially, the land had always been quiet, uninhabited, and unremarkable. Maps erased settlements, census records omitted families, and historians dismissed the area as wilderness. Yet every trace she remembered, the hollow beneath the oak tree, the stone foundation overgrown with ferns, the slight rise of earth where a house once stood, spoke of life. It was a contradiction between recorded reality and lived memory, a tension she carried in her mind and shared with her family in whispers. The silence also extended to human interactions. Neighbors of the vanished town, or those who had heard of it through whispers, avoided discussion. When questioned, their eyes would shift, hands fidget, voices falter. Some claimed ignorance, others hinted that speaking aloud could be dangerous. The woman's accounts suggested that powerful forces, local authorities, landowners, or cultural pressures had conspired to remove both the people and the knowledge of their existence. Not only were buildings destroyed and maps redrawn, but the very act of remembering had been discouraged. Even within her family, the weight of the silence was palpable. They understood that history could be manipulated, that official records could be shaped to serve agendas, but hearing the details from someone who had lived through, or at least remembered, the vanished town gave the silence a tangible presence. It was oppressive, yet compelling, like a puzzle begging to be solved. Each moment of stillness, each gap in the record became a clue. Her reflections on this silence were deeply human. She mourned not only the loss of structures, but the erasure of lives, relationships, and stories. She emphasized that absence is not always empty. It can be heavy, laden with the tension of what should exist but does not. For her, the forest was a monument to this absence, a living graveyard of memory, a place where time had been bent and reshaped by forces unseen. In the end, the silence became almost a character in itself, patient, watchful, and implacable. It was the quiet of deliberate erasure, a void that challenged anyone who entered it to remember, to imagine, and to reconstruct what had been lost. And it left her family with a chilling understanding. Some histories are not forgotten, they are actively silenced, leaving behind an eerie stillness that speaks louder than any words. Decades passed since the woman had shared her memories, yet the vanished town remained hidden beneath layers of forest and soil. The whispers persisted, faint hints of existence, but no tangible proof had surfaced, until the day construction crews arrived to build a new highway bypass. Their heavy machines groaned as they tore through the undergrowth, uprooting decades of overgrowth, and in the process, they stumbled upon fragments of a world the official record claimed had never existed. At first, it was small, a stone foundation barely visible beneath a blanket of moss. But as the dig continued, the discoveries multiplied. Broken ceramic plates, tarnished utensils, and shards of glass emerged from the earth. Wooden beams, long rotted, revealed the outlines of homes. Tools that had belonged to blacksmiths and carpenters lay half-buried, hinting at the labor that once sustained a thriving community. Children's toys, weathered but still recognizable, told a story of innocence abruptly interrupted. Each artifact was a tangible confirmation of the woman's memories, proof that life had flourished where official documents insisted nothing existed. As the dig continued, the layout of the settlement became increasingly clear. Narrow paths wound between foundations, as the woman had described. One corner of the site revealed the remains of what appeared to have been a small schoolhouse, its footprint and the remnants of desks aligned with meticulous care. Nearby, a stone well marked the center of a communal gathering space. The precise alignment of structures, the spacing of homes, and the traces of gardens confirmed the intricate organization of a community long thought erased. Archaeologists and historians were drawn to the site, initially skeptical but increasingly convinced. They documented the artifacts, measured foundations, and cross-referenced with surviving maps. What had been dismissed as folklore and the ramblings of a dying woman proved to be startlingly accurate. Each layer of soil told a story, a narrative of habitation, labor, and life that had persisted for decades before vanishing from memory. Even faint scorch marks on one foundation hinted at events that may have contributed to the town's sudden disappearance, conflict, accident, or deliberate destruction, though the cause remained elusive. Local residents who had heard rumors of the vanished town were drawn to the site.
Some remembered faint stories passed down by grandparents, whispers of neighbors suddenly gone, or nights spent fearing the woods. For them, seeing tangible evidence, stone foundations, fragments of homes, artifacts of daily life, was both shocking and validating. The physical proof confirmed what their ancestors had murmured in quiet tones. The settlement had existed, it had been vibrant, and it had been erased from official history. The discovery also raised questions about intent. Why had this town been removed from maps, records, and memory? Who decided that it should vanish? Artifacts suggested ordinary life, not extraordinary wealth or strategic importance, which made the erasure all the more sinister. Every tool, plate, and toy uncovered spoke to human lives deliberately expunged, raising moral and historical questions that official records could no longer answer. For the woman's family, the discovery was transformative. Her memories, once dismissed as unreliable, were validated in a dramatic and undeniable way. The physical evidence reinforced the notion that memory can preserve truths even when history itself conspires to erase them. The artifacts, foundations, and subtle traces of daily life were more than relics. They were proof of existence, defiance against the silence, and a testament to the lives of those who had been deliberately hidden. As the dig concluded, the family reflected on the weight of what had been uncovered. The town had existed exactly as she had described. Its erasure was intentional, yet it could not withstand the persistence of memory combined with evidence. The discovery transformed the vanished settlement from whispered rumor into undeniable history, revealing that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, cannot remain hidden forever.
The moment the artifacts were uncovered, the story of the vanished town shifted from mystery to conspiracy. Scholars and locals alike began asking questions. Why had this settlement been erased? Who benefited from its disappearance? And most chillingly, why did official records and maps present the area as uninhabited when the evidence proved otherwise? The woman had hinted at the answer decades earlier in hushed whispers during her final days. She spoke of powerful interests, landowners, local authorities, and perhaps corporate or political figures who decided the town could not exist in the historical record. According to her memories, disputes over land, resources, and ownership had erupted decades before her death. Families who resisted selling their property or refused to conform to outside control became inconvenient obstacles. Erasure was not an accident, it was deliberate, premeditated, and meticulous. Every missing record, every altered map now appeared as evidence of an orchestrated effort to rewrite history. Property deeds were mysteriously lost, census records contained glaring gaps, and old maps were redrawn to omit entire streets and homes. Even oral histories from neighboring communities were suppressed over time, whether by fear, persuasion, or quiet intimidation. Those who remembered the town were pressured to stay silent. The silence of decades, the absence of acknowledgement was itself a weapon, one that erased memory from the land, from documents, and from society's collective consciousness. Evidence suggested that the removal was methodical. Foundations were dismantled, structures decayed unnaturally fast, and paths that had once guided daily life were overgrown deliberately. Even ceremonial spaces, small churchyards, communal gathering areas were obliterated. Every effort was made to ensure that no trace remained visible to the casual observer or to future generations. In essence, the town had been scrubbed from history, leaving only whispers, vague memories, and the occasional fragment buried in soil. Local historians theorized that the cover-up was motivated by more than land disputes. The settlement's residents may have represented a marginalized or immigrant community whose existence challenged the narratives of power, property, and social order at the time. Their work, Culture and daily lives were quietly deemed inconvenient, an anomaly that authorities could remove without public scrutiny. The woman's insistence on remembering names, routines, and relationships became a moral act. She preserved a history that powerful forces had worked tirelessly to destroy. Even the family could sense the human cost. Lives were erased as easily as structures. Names vanished from registries, and generations who could have traced their lineage found no evidence of their ancestry. The ordinary joys of life, births, marriages, celebrations were denied recognition. Tragedy and conflict, as the woman remembered, had occurred, yet the world officially recorded nothing. The absence of accountability was deliberate, leaving the town's story to linger only in fragmented memory and physical traces uncovered decades later. The cover-up extended beyond bureaucracies. Oral histories were censored, gossips suppressed, and public discussion discouraged. Fear and compliance maintained the silence for decades. Anyone who tried to speak of the vanished town risked ridicule, skepticism, or social ostracism. Memory itself became a dangerous act. By the time the woman recounted the story to her family, the weight of decades of deliberate erasure was palpable. She understood that some truths can survive only through the persistence of human recollection and the courage of those willing to remember. The family reflected on the scale of the deception. Entire communities, carefully documented by memory and later confirmed by excavation, had been expunged from records, maps, and collective awareness. It was an unsettling reminder of the fragility of history, how easily official narratives can be manipulated, and how quickly ordinary lives can vanish without notice. The woman's final act, sharing what she knew, was more than storytelling. It was an act of resistance against a cover-up that spanned generations, ensuring that the truth, however suppressed, could not remain buried forever. Standing at the edge of the forest, where the foundations of homes had been revealed, her family could feel the weight of what had been lost, and what had been deliberately hidden. The vanished settlement was no longer a story of whispers. It had become an undeniable testament to lives lived, work accomplished, and a community erased. The woman's memories, validated by artifacts and foundations, had bridged the gap between personal recollection and historical truth. They realized that history is not a neutral chronicle, but a fragile construct, vulnerable to manipulation by those who hold power over records, maps, and collective memory. The discovery forced a deeper reckoning. The town had existed, thrived, and vanished not due to natural decay, misfortune, or accident, but because deliberate forces had chosen to remove it from the record. Names were erased, streets redrawn, and families consigned to oblivion, as if their lives were unworthy of acknowledgement. The human cost of this erasure was staggering. Children who had played in gardens now existed only as fragments in soil and memory. Parents who had labored for their homes had their achievements erased. Every story the woman remembered, every detail she had preserved in her mind, became an act of defiance against the weight of official silence. Memory and evidence converged in a way that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. The foundations, the broken plates, the toys, these were not relics of mere curiosity. They were proof of resilience, proof that human existence leaves traces even when erased from formal history. Yet the reflection went beyond the physical. It was also a meditation on the fragility of remembrance. How many communities, families, and individuals had been wiped from official records, leaving nothing but the faintest echoes? How many truths were hidden in the shadows of bureaucracy, power, or prejudice? The vanished town was a stark reminder that absence is not always emptiness. It is often deliberate, intentional, and morally charged. Her family could also sense the emotional weight the woman had carried throughout her life. Remembering a place that no one else acknowledged required courage, persistence, and devotion. She had resisted the temptation to allow the town to vanish entirely, preserving its memory in meticulous detail.
In sharing her recollections, she created a bridge across time, allowing the next generation to witness and validate lives that official history denied. The act of remembering became a form of justice, however quiet and incomplete, against a system that had sought to silence the truth. This reflection also exposed a tension between official history and lived experience. Documents and maps may claim absence, yet memory preserves presence. The interplay between what is recorded and what is remembered demonstrates that history is not solely composed of facts on paper. It is a tapestry woven from human recollection, material evidence, and the moral courage to question authority. The woman's story underscored that some histories, no matter how deeply buried, cannot be completely silenced. Ultimately, the vanished settlement was both a tragedy and a triumph. It was a tragedy because ordinary lives were erased, communities obliterated, and histories denied. It was a triumph because memory endured, proof that human experience can resist erasure. The forest, once a symbol of absence and silence, became a repository of persistence, holding the traces of lives that refused to vanish entirely. The reflection lingered with her family. Even when records are manipulated, maps redrawn, and society forgets, the truth can survive, carried by those who remember, validated by what remains, and ultimately revealed to anyone willing to listen. Her final words, spoken to those who listened, were both somber and resolute. The world may attempt to erase its histories, but memory, evidence, and the human desire for truth endure, preserving the existence of those who should never have been forgotten. Some histories aren't lost. They're hidden, buried beneath the soil, silenced by power, but never entirely gone. If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Dive deeper into America's buried nightmares, where forgotten places, erased communities, and hidden truths wait to be uncovered. Every story we reveal is a chance to remember what history tried to erase.